So the sumo deadlift technique is very tricky. It's very different from conventional. John gives a really good analogy for this, saying that sumo is like a golf swing and conventional is like swinging a hammer. Conventional, you need a lot of strength to lift heavier weights, whereas sumo, you can be weaker and lift the same weight as someone that's stronger. And that's the beauty of it, is because I'm not a very strong person. I don't have a lot of strength, but if you can express that strength very well through higher mechanical efficiencies and technique, then you're gonna have a higher wilks, because your body weight's gonna be lower and the weight you're lifting is gonna be higher. That's why I've always thought of technique as one of the most important things in powerlifting. So I've approached the sumo deadlift from a very different mindset than a lot of people have. And I've kind of like tried to take my own way with it. So I am 6'1", so I'm pretty tall, so I do take a very wide stance. I put my toes out almost like a half an inch from the plates. And I open up my feet angle to the angle at which I need my knees to track in order for me to get a 90-degree angle in my knees when I'm sitting down into my bottom position. And that way I'm going to get a higher power output out of the hole. And most of the time with sumo deadlifting, out of the hole is one of the most difficult places to move the weight. And so I've developed a technique to help me push past that and stop getting pinned on the floor. And the way that I've done that is through the utilization of a stretch reflex. Deadlifting doesn't have an eccentric phase, so utilizing a stretch reflex seems a very foreign concept. However, we can create a false stretch reflex by using the specific technique that I use. So what I tend to do is tend to grab the bar with my hips high. And here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna brace, and then from here, I'm gonna build tension in the bar. The bar is almost elevating because it's 135. It takes a certain amount of weight to be able to pull myself under with proper technique. So what I do is I set my grip, set my shoulders, set my hands, and then I'm gonna use the weight of the bar to pull myself under and into position and come up. With this technique, what we're doing is we're using our hamstrings and we're firing them while we're loading our back with the bar. And what that does is it creates a stretch reflex in your quads. And that causes the weight to pop off the ground just a tad bit easier, because now you don't need to produce as much force to get that weight to break off the floor, which can be very important when you're moving heavier loads, especially when your strength curve is going to be lowest at the bottom here. How filling in that gap in the strength curve with that stretch reflex can be very, very important. One thing that I like to touch on too is grip. A lot of people that pull sumo use a mixed grip, and that's fine if you're that kind of person. I will always advocate, if you can, if you have your hands the ability to use a hook grip, which is essentially where you wrap your thumb around the bar and bring your fingers over the top of your thumb. So I advocate using a double overhand hook grip, and the reason for this is because it allows for a much more mechanically advantageous shoulder position. So if you think of using a mixed grip, when I grab the bar and I'm erect, you can see how high the bar is off the ground right now. It's probably like three inches or so, 2 or 3 inches off the ground. So, but when I use my technique for my shoulders, which is to internally rotate your shoulder, stack it in front of your lat that you're flaring, and then externally rotate your forearm, I'm able to put my shoulders in a slightly more forward position, increasing the mechanical efficiency of the lift, and also reducing the range of motion. As you can see, I'm fully locked out, and the bar is just slightly hovering over the ground. maybe like a ½ an inch or so. And so that itself is very useful because, as we were talking about earlier, our strength curve is going to be the weakest in the bottom of the lift. So cutting down at an inch, maybe an inch and a half of range of motion, because we're using a hook grip, we're allowing for our arms to sit and hang a little bit lower. We're going to increase the mechanical efficiency and lift an overall heavier weight at our maximum attempts. Another important thing is you see a lot of lifters trying to go too wide with sumo. Just because someone that's good at lifting takes a very wide stance doesn't mean that's going to be the most mechanically efficient. You have to work to your biomechanics. The longer your femurs are and the shorter your torso is, typically the better you're going to be at pulling sumo, especially if you have good external rotation of your femurs, so that you can get into a more vertical position. Those three things are gonna define what a really good sumo deadlifter as far as mechanics goes. Now you see a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but you see a few select people that are really good at sumo deadlifting, but don't necessarily adapt these types of techniques. A great example is one of the best deadlifters in the world, Windham. He pulls in what I call a modified sumo conventional, which is basically he's in a sumo stance, but he's pulling in a manner that's halfway between a conventional deadlift and halfway between a sumo deadlift. And when I'm referring to sumo and conventional, I'm not talking about foot stance. What I'm talking about is using your back, lifting with your back versus lifting with your legs and your hips. I personally lift a lot with my legs and my hips, whereas he tends to use a lot more back. He's very strong, he's very good at it. And it's a little bit less mechanically advantageous, but if you have the strength to make up for it, then that's okay. One other thing that I think is important to touch on is knee tracking. You see a lot of lifters that tend to track their knees in front of the bar while they're lifting, and this is a bad technique, and it needs to be fixed. So when you're setting your foot in the right position for the lift, you should always make sure that when you're sitting down in that bottom position, that you can get your knees behind the bar so that it can come up past it and you can move in a vertical position. If your knees track over the bar, it's gonna push the bar forward, and you're gonna be lifting with that bar, if you see while my knees are locked out, in front of you like this, which is very, very, very mechanically disadvantageous. And the loads that you're gonna be lifting are drastically lower than what your strength expression is capable of. So always make sure to align your technique in a manner that's going to complement your biomechanics so that you can lift the most weight for the amount of strength that you have. And from there, the goal is to build the strength once you have the technique. So always remember, guys, technique first, then strength.